The year was 1944. Outpost. Sierra 3 was nothing more than a stone shepherd's hut reinforced with sandbags, perched on a narrow ledge 6,000 feet up in the Italian Alps. Down in the valleys, the war moved with tanks and trucks, but up here, the war moved at the speed of a mule's heartbeat. Corporal Silas Grip Thorne was a mountain scout. He was a man of few words and thick calluses. In a place where a single misstep meant 1,000-foot fall into a cloud-filled abyss, Silas was the one who mapped the Ghost Path's trails, so narrow that a man had to press his chest against the rock just to pass. The slow ascent life at Sierra 3 was a test of the lungs. The air was thin, tasting of cold flint and pine. Everything was lent slow. To boil water took twice as long. To catch your breath took 10 minutes. To move a single crate of ammunition from the supply trail to the peak took an entire day of grueling, rhythmic climbing. The men lived in the hush. Because sound carried for miles in the mountain air, they spoke in low murmurs. They wore thick, white wool parkas and spent their days chipping ice off their equipment. "Do you think the mountain wants us here, Silas?" asked Kovic, a city boy from Chicago who spent every day shivering. "I feel like it's trying to breathe us off its shoulder." Silas sharpened his ice axe with a whetstone, a scritch-scritch sound echoing in the small hut. "The mountain doesn't have a side, Kovic. It just has a height. We stay because we can endure the slow. The enemy is waiting for us to rush. That's when you slip." The frozen thread one Tuesday, the white blindness arrived, a cloud so thick it felt like being wrapped in wet cotton. In the middle of the whiteout, a frantic signal came from a forward observer post higher up the ridge. They were surrounded by a specialized German mountain unit, and their radio batteries were dying. They were out of food, out of warmth, and sinking into the lent sleep of hypothermia. "We can't get a mule up there in this," the sergeant said, staring into the white void. "And a man carrying a pack will be too slow. He'll freeze before he reaches them." Silas stood up. He didn't take a pack. He took a long coil of climbing rope and a small satchel of high-calorie chocolate and medical morphine. "I don't need a mule. I just need the Ghost Path." The vertical crawl, Silas stepped out into the white. He couldn't see his own boots. He moved by touch, his fingers finding the familiar cracks in the limestone. This was the ultimate Lent mission. He couldn't hurry. If he spiked his heart rate, he'd sweat, and the sweat would turn to a layer of ice against his skin. He climbed. His world narrowed down to the next 2 inches of rock. Reach, grip, pull, breathe. He became part of the stone. At one point, a ledge crumbled beneath his boot, leaving him dangling by his fingertips over a gray nothingness. He didn't panic. He hung there for 3 full minutes, slowing his heart, waiting for his muscles to stop screaming before pulling himself back up. The gift of heat, he reached the observer post 6 hours later. He found the 3 men huddled together under a single frozen tarp, their eyes glazed. They weren't fighting the enemy anymore. They were fighting the Lent death, the slow shutting down of the body. Silas didn't shout. He moved with practiced, slow movements. He broke the chocolate into small pieces, feeding them like birds. He rubbed their hands. He used his rope to create a heat line, huddling with them to share his body warmth. You came up the cliff?" One of the men whispered, his voice like dry leaves. "The mountain let me through," Silas whispered back. "Now we just have to wait for the sun." The descent of the living, when the clouds finally broke the next morning, the valley below was filled with the gold of a winter sunrise. Silas guided the 3 men down, tied together by the rope, moving in a slow, rhythmic line. They looked like a single creature crawling down the spine of the world. When they finally reached the safety of Sierra 3, the men were taken to the fire. Silas sat outside on a stone, watching the peaks turn a deep, bruised purple in the twilight. The sergeant walked out and sat beside him. Most men would have waited for the fog to clear, Silas. Silas looked at his hands. The fingernails were torn, and his skin was the color of the rock itself. If I waited for the clear, I would have been bringing back ghosts, Sarge. Up here, you don't wait for the weather. You just find a way to move inside it. The war eventually moved north, over the Alps, and into the heart of Europe. Outpost Sierra 3 returned to being a shepherd's hut. But the ghost path remained, a silent trail marked by the invisible footprints of a man who knew that in the high, cold places, the only way to survive was to match the slow, eternal pulse of the mountain.